What I've presented to the board is a proposal for individual teacher contracts. The change in not having a collective bargaining agreement has prompted the recommended changes. These changes have been discussed with the Personnel Committee as well as legal counsel prior to, as well, including today.
Michael, can I look at that? I don't have it.
To verify that what we have is appropriate. I guess one of the discussions I had is that it is.
May I have a copy of that? I don't have it.
Let's give you
He has one. Okay, thank you.
I think substantially there's not major changes to it. In further conversations, as we've actually gotten more clarification. Today I did on collective bargaining and what we can negotiate and how we can negotiate. So hopefully we can get that underway and try to come to some conclusions on that in the near future. But one of the recommendations is that we do leave the current year's salary in the contracts for issuance by May 15th. The other changes are basically legal and just language. You can see the years that are changed and the start date, actually having the start date of the school year or the work year. And number 5, that if a teacher is under tenure, the terms of this contract apply insofar as not in conflict with section 118.23 of the Wisconsin statutes. So that relates to the Milwaukee County or Populous County tenure law, which is an impact for a number of our employees. And then the other piece that teachers shall maintain all licenses from year to year, and that they hold upon execution of that contract. So we don't get into a situation that somebody that has a license would allow one of their license to lapse, so we wouldn't have flexibility to move them into a different area. There have been situations that have occurred where that has happened, and that's been added into the contract. I don't know if any members of the Personnel Committee have anything they would like to add.
Mrs. Randall?
Actually, just more of a question on what you just talked about with the licensing. We didn't talk about this specific thing at our committee about maintaining. There was some discussion about just whether or not the word valid, having a valid license would be enough, or if it was going to be. But so anyway, I guess what I want to ask is, given this is a 1-year contract, how does that language work? You know what I'm saying?
No.
Well, you're saying if this is a contract for the school year, obviously they can't let their license lapse. They're teaching 3rd grade.
Correct.
Okay. And it's a 1-year contract. So why would you say in here?
I would look at it and say that it's so they continue to do the work that needs to be done throughout each and every year, because if it's not in there, that if they allow it to lapse, but I think this is a requirement because I think you take coursework over time, or you do your professional development plan to maintain that licensure, and some of that involves different components within the school district.
I don't know. It really. I'm not sure I still understand why you would want them to, why we would hold people responsible for anything beyond a year in a 1-year contract. Somebody else help?
Well, I mean, it was a legal or a recommendation from legal counsel to put that in there, because I think that statute is, I mean, when Act 10 came through, that was the one statute, other than one component of that statute that was removed, stayed intact because of, I'm not talking about the same thing. Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for it.
Does anybody else on the board asking, or
No,
no? Okay.
I don't see any other hands up. But
I know what you're saying.
could
I
you
mean,
go
clear.
further, maybe, that we would know just a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess I would expect the language to be what it was, that at the time that we hire this teacher and for this period of 1 year, they have and will maintain a valid license for the position they're being hired for, or whatever. I mean,
Well, I think if I look at it again, the contract goes from August 29th through the end of the school year.
right,
So it's really not a full year. So they have if they let their license lapse over the summer and they've got a contract already for the start, I think it has to do with the timeline with school year versus the year-round schedule.
yeah, I get all that. I guess it's the from year to year. That doesn't
Oh.
make sense to me. Takes me a while to get to the point.
I mean, okay. I mean, I think that could be, it's redundant in some ways. I don't think would be required.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, like I said, if we're not giving them if this isn't a contract for multi-years, I don't know that we can put conditions on it for.
I don't think we need to, let alone
No,
require
I mean, we all
it to.
know, we know what we want. We know that they have to have a valid license. You'll decide upon hiring if it's a license that you want for them to, or the position you're hiring them for, and they have to maintain that.
Mr. Croner, do you have something that
Yeah,
could help us?
My recollection
with this?
from discussing this at the personnel meeting is to try to increase the flexibility for the district in assigning positions. If a teacher, for example, is hired with let's say both a elementary school and a high school math certification, and you hire them for elementary, and you want to maybe move them to high school the following year or later in that year if you had to, that when they're working in elementary school, they could let their high school license lapse because they don't really want to teach in high school, and then you're stuck, they get to keep the position that they want. The way this is written is so that if you hire someone that has multiple licenses and you would like them to keep all of those licenses for maximum flexibility as far as staffing goes, they would have to maintain all those licenses during this contract year. And then before the next contract gets signed, you would be able to make a decision of where they're going to fit in the district, and then that new contract would apply to those licenses that you want them to keep for the following year.
And
That's the way I understood it, and the year to year, to me, if that's a legal way to put it, that's fine.
Okay, here's the reason for year to year. I just recalled it. It's about the non-renewals, because we have the non-renewal timeline. So if all of a sudden in June, we recognize that a license wasn't maintained, we couldn't non-renew. They would have a contract. Even though it's a one-year contract, there is rollovers within it unless you go through the non-renewal process. That's the reason for the year to year.
Mary Jo, does that begin to help a little
It
bit?
kind of does, yeah. Do we have issues like this?
We have had, I can think of one issue that occurred and one issue that was attempted.
So from year to year, is that 5 years, 10 years? I mean,
It'd
if
be-
I'm certified for second grade and then,
This year to next year, and then, I mean, it's kind of like a renewal of a contract that has an automatic rollover.
yeah, but they
It's
do.
looking at
they
a
are gonna-
rollover related to licensure.
Right, but they will get a new contract the next year, no matter what, right?
Not if they
they're gonna be
don't, no.
hired. If they're gonna be hired here, they will have a contract with
Right.
language in it saying you have to come to work with a valid license. Every year, we're
Correct.
gonna tell them that.
But remember, they get the contract by May 15th each
Yeah.
year, or the next year.
Right.
So the first year, I don't think it matters. But if you're going through your first year, and let's say your fifth year, you have a K through 8 license, and you're teaching in the middle school, and you really don't like teaching in the middle school. So in that fifth year, you renew your license in K6 or K5, which you can do, and not renew the other part. that would be a problem because we don't have a space or we don't want that person to teach. But if we don't have this language in there and we don't go through the non-renewal process, they would be entitled to a job at the elementary level because they have a contract.
But if they don't have a license, that's part of the contract.
They have a license to teach, not a license for their current assignment.
Right. That's what I'm saying, valid. Okay, this must just be me. So
Would
I'm
be a
gonna
valid,
quiet
the
for a little
K-6,
bit
the
and
K-6 license would be a valid license. Or the K-5.
Okay. Wait,
I mean, it's not a huge
Yeah,
issue.
I'm
It
gonna
doesn't
let it
happen.
go
It doesn't
because-
happen. Like I said, I know of, the one of them occurred a couple of years before I was here, so that was 10 years ago. The other one was more recent.
Michael?
Last year, after Act 10, there was discussion on the board about reorganizing the school district and our teaching structure and having a compensation plan in alignment with performance. And administration came to the board and said, recommended salary freeze, everybody the same money as last year. And members of the board said, what about reorganization? And what about a compensation plan in furtherance of performance? And we were told that there wasn't time and you needed another year. My question is, if we agree to all these one-year contracts, have we lost another year then? What happens to reorganization? What happens to compensation plan in furtherance of performance? What happens if Mr. Croner in June, when we're looking at the budget, says we want to talk about reallocation of priorities, and Mr. Meyer says it's too late, which is what we always do. And if we agree to renewal of everyone's one-year contract, we've pretty much agreed to lock in another year just the way we are now. Is that accurate or not accurate?
What do you mean by just the way we are now?
Well, there's no reorganization of our teaching structure. There's no compensation plan of great significance in furtherance of performance. There's no ability to allocate resources in alignment with priorities. I agree with Mr. Croner that that would be a good thing to do. I'm just trying to help the cause here by earlier than June. It's probably actually too late now already, but to say the board wanted to do that, and this looks like if we agree to this, we'll be agreeing to having to wait another year, because once a set of one-year contracts are signed, there'll be no changing anything until next year. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
I don't think it gets in the way of either one. I think the recommendation that we're going to be bringing forward to the board prior to the start of the next school year for a compensation plan wouldn't be enacted until the following school year. And the reason is that it's going to involve some types of responsibilities that occur next year. So people know in advance what they're going to be compensated on for 13-14 versus saying, okay, in August, here's how you're going to be compensated this year. Here's the things you need to change.
But that's what you said last year.
No, we said we would come in 1 year and look at it for the following year and keep the basic structure that we had. But with scheduling, the other component that fits into it, we'll bring a recommendation to the board before the start of this school year for the following school year, because when we look at reorganizing, if we do something different at the middle school and high school, doing the training that it takes in the following year to get ready for it for implementation in 13-14. So I think the timing fits for 13-14 for all those components to come in. So I don't see the contract in doing these contracts getting in the way of it at all. If we move to a reorganization where we have people that are not licensed in positions where they're at, we'll be prepared to issue non-renewals if needed.
What about pay for performance, that we're agreeing that everybody will have gone how many years without pay in alignment with performance? It basically, we're freezing again for another year. What would the board have said if you had said last year that you wanted to freeze pay for 2 years?
I don't know. I didn't ask that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Mr. Croner?
Just a couple of comments based on what Mr. Meyer said. First of all, Mike, I noticed, the dollars aren't filled in here yet. So there's flexibility, like, still, I guess, until the contract is signed to modify what the salaries are going to be. And my second comment is, I assume that we could always add money to someone's compensation. For example, if the board decided we wanted to compensate a teacher or give a bonus for getting national certification or something next year, I assume that we could always add that amount, and the teacher could accept it even though this contract is signed. That'd be fair to say. If
Right.
we can make small additions to salary based on performance or certain things, even though this is in place. I assume the teachers would be willing to modify the contract to
Well,
accept the bonus.
it's subject to any type of agreement that we get for future compensation. And, it says subject to terms contained in the collective bargaining agreement, if any. So that's, the collective bargaining agreement is the negotiated salary increase. So what will happen is we'll issue this. If for some reason we're able to complete negotiations prior to that and have a new salary put in place, we would do that. But as we complete that, we would then reissue the same contract again with the updated dollar amount. So yes, there's flexibility to do that.
I'm saying even if we wanted to add a program or two to give a bonus to teachers for outstanding performance, say, we could still do that within
Yes.
this system.
Yes.
Mary Jo?
Mike, I wasn't sure what you meant by reorganization. I know what you're talking about with performance pay or whatever we're using, but what do you mean by reorganization?
Well, if we examine our priorities and examine what we teach and decide whether or not what we teach is in alignment with our priorities, if our compensation structure, as far as rewarding those teaching offerings that are more important to our strategic objectives, such as literacy and science, and others perhaps are not, to look at the market to see whether we conclude that increasing salary for those offerings that are more in alignment with our strategic objectives would whether we believe it would result in a better outcome for the students and the learning, those kinds of things. And we have not done that, and 2 years is a long time because it will be then the third year before any change is implemented, and that is what I mean. And so it's the kinds of things I believe that Mr. Croner mentions in June. If maybe not precisely so, but along the same, we're thinking along the same direction. Dr. Ertl did say he would write in last year's salary number into the contracts. He said that tonight. So, does that explain my concern?
Yeah, it does. We did start that process, and I think,
Compensation?
yeah, and I think you have committees within the staff community that are working on this, meeting about it.
Yes.
And so, when we bargain base, is it base wage or base salary that the law says?
Base wage.
Base wage. We are not allowed to talk about at that point any kind of extra pay or any kind of reimbursement for master's degrees or any kind of, national honor, national merit teachers. none of that can happen now when we talk about,
You mean in negotiations? Correct.
okay. So we really have to,
That's at the board table.
okay, so we really have to have that outside group getting it, and what's been the delay?
The delay is trying to figure out, just trying to figure out what's going to work to improve student learning. And the more, to be honest, the more research that continue to do, the less complex I become in my thinking. The research really talks about, there's no good research to talk about performance-based systems that are improving student achievement. But we're still working through it, and the work is slow, but it's going to be accelerated before the start of the school year because it needs to be put in place. And as I've personally gone around and talked to different teaching staffs, that's when I said, when you come back to school, you need to know how you're going to be compensated for the following year, so you're able to know what you need to do to get that compensation. I don't think it's fair to say after the fact or during the fact, say this is how you're going to be compensated for what you did or didn't do last year, so you don't give people the opportunity to do those types of things, whether it's extra pay or different types of responsibilities that people assume.
But could we assume that this year we were able at least to identify things that aren't going to work? Even though we haven't been able to come up with a plan? I mean,
I think we got to have a plan that reflects our district's goals. There's no research to show any compensation plan improves student performance. Not the current one, not any pay for performance. So we just need to align and I think it's along with what Mr. Meyer is saying. Align it with what we believe our district values are. And to me, more importantly, what's going to retain and probably most importantly, recruit the best teachers. As I look at some of the districts putting different things into place, sometimes I look at it and say, I'm glad they're doing that because the best teacher that they were going to get, now we can make sure they come to our district. I just want to make sure we become that district that everybody wants to come to, and not just for how we pay people, but our student performance as well.
okay. So what we would be approving then would be this basic contact language with last year's compensation filled in, and then we will be entering bargaining to
Right.
determine if
correct.
that's going to stay the same or not.
The way it'll be on the agenda for next Monday, it'll be approval of, actually the list of teachers for full-time contracts would be in the consent agenda, and the list of every teacher would be on there. And then approval of the form for the individual contracts. So what you're approving then is the teachers, then you're approving the form. Teachers' names would go on those, knowing that it's going to be the current salary amount, and the current salary amount will be listed on the motion as well. Not for each individual teacher, but for the contract itself.
Mr. Giroux?
Yeah, we've gone through a lot of personnel handbook writing because we no longer have a collective bargaining agreement. And now I see in the contract, there's reference to a collective bargaining agreement.
We still,
What is that?
it's 2 pages that lists the salary. I mean,
Can I see that?
Sure,
Whatever that collective bargaining agreement is?
yeah, it's very limited. It's been reduced down to just base wages.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then Phil asked a question about giving bonuses above and beyond the contractual base wage. Did you say yes, we could, or did you say no, we can't?
Yes, you can.
Yes, we can. So the fund balance that's always left over at the end of the year, it's a one-time expenditure, that could be used for personnel bonuses? One time?
You can, but I wouldn't look at the fund balance as,
I'm just asking.
I know, but I wouldn't look at the fund balance as something that's expendable because
I didn't
it's
say it was
relied
expendable.
upon. It's relied upon for the next year's budget. But to answer your
But you
question,
spend it.
yes,
But you spend it.
on next year's expenditures.
Whenever you spend it, you could spend it on bonuses.
Right, then we'll reduce somewhere else.
You budget correctly instead of having slop and carrying it forward. That's the way I look at it. Never mind.
When you say following year, it's a minor thing, do you mean the year before us, the 1912-13, or are we speaking about 13-14?
This contract is for 12-13.
Thank you. Yes, Mary Jo?
I just want to say, you know, your comments are really well taken, because when we did collective bargaining and we didn't use fund balance for pay raises because it was ongoing,
Right.
that made sense. So I mean, really, we have to think about everything. And I know, Dr. Ertl, you're open to thinking about everything. So I'll just leave it at that, and that Mr. Jaros is not way out there, I don't think.
Well, I think you just got to be careful about looking at
Yes.
it as slop, and that it's, I mean, there's a reason
Oh,
we're
yeah.
one of 3 AAA bond-rated districts, because I think it's responsible use of dollars. I mean, when we don't short-term borrow, if we start using that money, we get into the point, I mean, it's got to come from somewhere, and it's a recurring cycle, so
Teachers have to come from somewhere too.
I couldn't agree more.
Is there further question? Do you have further comment?
No, just that it will be on the agenda for Monday.
Do we entertain community?
You certainly can.
Let's do that, okay. Is there any community comment on this subject, please? If so, please come to the mic and give your name and address. Okay, seeing none, is there anything else that we need to have on this agenda?
No.
Okay, then if it's acceptable, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second?
Mary Jo, second, right? Okay, and I don't think we have to take a roll call on this one. To be on the safe side, I will take roll call. Mr. Jaros?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Mufeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Do you like to write those?
For